I have to use the resources I have available right now. So let's go and do it. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Mr. Dogboat333, and welcome to a tier list. It's been a while since I've done one of these, at least for TNO, and I figured it was about time. I uploaded the first one I ever did back, I think New Year. It says right here, actually, New Year's Day 2021, which was a very long time ago. Relatively. It feels like a long time ago. And then I did a re-upload about a year later in 2022. And that was just kind of more to update things. I had some changes of perspectives with the content. And I figured, you know what? It's about time to go ahead and change things up. And I haven't done it in a while just because I didn't want to keep uploading tier lists when there hasn't been any substantial content anymore. But since the last time I've done it, there has been some pretty substantial content that's been added. They completely changed up the roster of the presidents that could be elected in 1972. They completely gutted John Glenn, who was formerly my S tier contender. Might have been my only S tier contender, though I might have put... Oh, I think I only had one S tier contender. Yeah, and that was John Glenn. I'm going to pull up my old one real quick and just see where I ended up putting things at the end of it. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and... I don't know if I'll put up my old tier list necessarily. But yeah. Did Glenn was unironically the worst decision TNO has ever made. I'm still not over that. I was kind of upset at the time, but we'll get to that when we get to his replacement. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and go with the new update as of Ugly American. Now, it's been a while since I played the US itself. I'm kind of basing this off my memory, seeing what I've seen on the subreddit, for all the content, some of the discourse around that, and roughly my own memory, and plus what I remember seeing off of TV tropes. So, I haven't done a full LP of playthrough of America. You can check out my TNO LP, where I did RFK to John Glenn. I'll try to remember to upload in the put it in the link below, along with my old tier list if you guys want to check those out. But, well, you know, that's then. This is now, and so what I'm gonna do, I might start. I'll probably just start chronologically. Just kind of go with who we start off with, and then take it from there. You know, I'll go for like all the possible 64 presidents, then all the possible 68 presidents, end things off on the 72 presidents, which I kind of just, last time I ranked them, I just kind of put in a separate list. And like a separate tier, like, I don't know, they don't have full content yet. Except for Yockey and Hall, I think I just... Well, you can see what I did in the video before to figure out what I did with them. But I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, well, if I'm rating Yockey and Hall, I might as well give the other ones a swing. So this is where we're at right now. So before we continue, let's take a quick moment's silence for both George McGovern and John Glenn, who are no longer TNO president options. Godspeed, spaceman. Anywho, so let's go ahead and get it started. My just general rankings, like my general thought process is kind of sometimes gameplay related if I remember how they play. Because I've played a couple of these like off camera just for like a little bit, and then I've done some LPs. I'm mainly going on what would probably be the best for America and its position in the Cold War between Germany and Japan, and just like some general like commentary, like how would things end up going, like domestically, foreign policy wise. It's not the most informed list, and in fact, I might possibly amend this in the future if I do anything more. Like, I am planning another U.S. President series. I was going to wait for a future update. I was going to add like a bunch of OFN stuff, but waiting for TNO updates is a very, very long game. And so I might just go ahead and play a new campaign soon. I'm going to stop dilly-dallying and then actually just get going to this. So let's go ahead and start with the man, the myth, the legend, Tricky Dick Nixon. Now, they reworked his path and like how he gets impeached, which is quite interesting how they did it. Because originally, in like the original lore, it was basically Watergate 2.0, and that could get him impeached. This is tied to, I believe, his interference in Madagascar and aiding certain government forces in there. And I forget exactly what really drives that to be an impeachable offense, but I think they're technically supported by the Japanese, but he's helping that out, and there's like some extra congressional stuff. It's a little peculiar. It's also trying to undermine German dominance in Africa, which anything to own the Nazis is undeniably based. So it's a better conclusion to a story than the old lore, potentially, from my understanding. If I'm wrong, just go ahead and yell at me in the comment section. I might amend this, like I said. So that already has me a little bit warmer. I believe last time I put him in the C tier. The thing that's, I think, the biggest deciding factor is what you do with the Civil Rights Act. And because that kind of sets up everything. Because you can choose to allow it and sign it through, and that will open up a chain of events where, like, a George Wallace could be elected. Or if you veto it, that might allow RFK to come in. And if you do nothing for a while, there ends up being a big police conference, and you end up just having to be forced to choose it, which that's more of a player decision to be a bit more RNG, like not optimally played, just like if you decide to idle on all focuses. So I don't know how much I'll seriously consider weighing that into it, but Dick Nixon. I put him in C last time. Do I still want to put him in C tier? I'll put him in C tier for now, and then we'll see where we end up going from there. All right, so Nixon gets impeached, and then we get good old Camelot, Jackie Kennedy. No, Jack Kennedy. Jackie's his wife. Sorry. And like the last couple videos, I am reintroducing the F to pay respect tier. This is not an F tier in the traditional sense. By the way, it's S being the best, F being the worst. Typical tier list setup for the rankings. This is the only fun one that I have, or the different one, because, I mean, he's sort of just a placeholder president. Like, he has a little bit of stuff, but he can't really do too much because he gets shot. I think officially by a white nationalist in this, because I reworked Valor from a Guyanese nationalist to actual just outright white supremacist. So let us take a moment to pay respect to good old Jack Kennedy, who can never catch a break. The Kennedys can never catch a break. Well, they can maybe, but we'll get to that when we get to that. And that ends up leading to the caretaker president, the fluke president, Mr. McCormack. Now, I kind of consider McCormack in a similar sense to it as that to Nixon, in that he's sort of just like a placeholder, and he's more set up to set up the lore and like set up the '64 elections. I think he can do less drastic bad than Nixon, which has me a little bit more warm to him. Your main decision relates to the war in South Africa and how you want to angle yourself in the administration's approach to that, and whether you pardon Nixon or not. And that just kind of leaves to more ethical, hypothetical questions about whether you should pardon Nixon or not, as opposed to, Nixon's question is, should black people have rights or not? So it's a little bit less of a drastic and impact, more metaphorical, or not metaphorical, more intellectual decision, I suppose. So with that in mind, he doesn't do that much, but that's also not the worst thing necessarily. And he's not going to leave America in much a worse position than he picked it up in, other than maybe leading to some of the worst presidents to be elected. But that might just be that's more of a chain reaction at this point. And he can handle things fine if he wants to. So I'll go ahead and put John McCormack in the B tier. So we're going to go ahead and get along with the 64 presidents now. There are 4 options for the 4 different parties. You have Lyndon Johnson, who's a Democrat again, because he used to be a Republican in the weird old TNO USA lore. You have Wallace Bennett, the Republicans. You have RFK, Bobby Kennedy, who is a Progressive Pact of the NPP, a Progressive Party or National Progressive Pact. And then you have George Wallace, the gamer himself, states' rights / nationalist party, part of the National Progressive Pact. Who do you want to start with? Well, Wallace is right there at the start, so I might as well start with George Wallace. Oddly interesting figure, at least in my opinion, history-wise. Kind of an oddly interesting president, too. So, the big, elephant in the room is that he can continue segregation. And that is not very cool at all. In fact, you can go as far as to try and enforce a nationwide segregation, which can potentially get you impeached, and that will lead us to the secret president, because all the NPP candidates have a secret presidents, potentially, depending on if things go wrong. So I'll probably cover that once I'm done with Wallace. Yeah, and that's not very good. Now, there's actually a strangely blurst option. I don't want to use chronically online terms, but that's the best way I can describe it, where if you don't do anything in the segregation path, the game will kind of account for that, and you'll just have an event where George Wallace will just go ahead and, he'll drive through a neighborhood and, see it integrated, and he kind of, nods himself, you know what, this is all right. So it's a weird, nicely wholesome turn of events, but you also have a little note where it says that the states' rights party is, or all the states' rights voters who voted for, the segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever guy, are not happy that, he's not doing the whole states' rights shit. And they're going to go ahead and turn to the sovereigntist, which is Yockey's party. And that is not a very comforting thought. So even that better path has some very upsetting, potentially, possibilities. But we can try to talk about some positives. His economic path doesn't seem to be that bad. It actually is potentially pretty decent, working with some more economic integration into the pact. Not as in-depth as Bennett's, but there seems to be some okay stuff there. He's also, the NPP foreign policy tree is pretty solid. And it can end up with you getting Hawaii back pretty early. So, and, this is kind of where I get more into more of the writing path, but there is the impeachment path, which actually does get kind of interesting. And, like, we all know, like, the writing in TNO is pretty solid, even great compared to some of the other mods. And there's like an interesting like story turn if George Wallace gets impeached, because if he does, nationwide segregation, there's a huge police shootout, black children are murdered by the National Guard or something like that, and there's like some genuine remorse that he has. And if you end up electing Yockey, or if he gets impeached and we get to the secret president after, there's some real genuine remorse there. And I don't know, there's something compelling about that to me. And like Wallace, a little bit as a character, that makes me, was it worth it, Mr. President? Exactly. So that, he can potentially really fuck up the country, but like there are like some off-ramps that make it not quite as bad as it could be. And I only want to save the F tier for like the really like not very much redeemable traits. So with that in mind, I'm gonna put Wallace in the D tier. Not the best by any means, morally repugnant in a lot of ways, but there's some interesting tidbits there that kind of can elevate things. And I think one of my favorite parts about the Wallace path is that if you get impeached, you get Curtis LeMay. And Curtis LeMay is probably one of the funniest presidents that we have, option-wise. So if Wallace ends up getting impeached, Curtis LeMay, bombs away LeMay, will go and get inaugurated to president. And he will, no matter what, undo everything that Wallace did and pass a Civil Rights Act. It can either be reluctantly or pretty, I'm doing it. Fuck everyone else. And the flavor events that are included with LeMay are just incredible. Like there was like Reddit. I'll see a series of like all the president events where like they meet Borman, for example, and LeMay's event when he meets Martin Borman's congression is incredible. He just curses them out, and it's funny. There's like the presidential letter feature that you can write that presidents will write letters to each other. If you elect Hall right after Hall after Yockey, he literally tells Hall how to when shit goes hits a fan, how to properly aim the gun to commit die, which just there's something incredibly funny about that to me. He flat out tells Yockey to eat shit and die, you human cockroach. Impeccable stuff. And he has a really compelling letter that he ends up writing to Philip Hart as well. Now, I'm talking about the writing stuff because there's not that much to LeMay, I'll be honest. He'll pass the Civil Rights Act, and then once you finish up his little tree, you can do the foreign policy stuff, which will end up resulting in Hawaii being returned if you have enough time. So, it's not potentially too much there, but it's also just fucking funny, So, I'm going to go ahead and put LeMay in B tier for bombs away. B for bombs away. So that's one of the 64 candidates in the secret path done. What do we want to do next? We could talk about Bennett. Bennett is like the more boring technocratic options here, but he has some pretty solid options. And okay, let's start with it. His foreign policy stuff is pretty good. It's more about integrating the OFN into a larger economic bloc, from my understanding, just not making it more than a foreign policy bloc. And that's actually a pretty interesting and solid way to approach things. So an OFN under Bennett would be pretty strong economically and make people want to stick to it. Basically sets up like Bretton Woods, shit like that. Stuff that wasn't established already. His domestic policy stuff, it's focused, one path is economics and the other path is a question of civil rights. Because he tries to figure, there's like a whole mechanic of trying not to rock the boat, because he tries to present himself as like the middle of the road, boring guy from Utah who no one can take offense to. But there are questions how to approach the civil rights issue. And you can go fully into the civil rights issue or be very conservative and just add some token bills. And I forget how exactly you can manage it, but you can set America up to be in a pretty good spot economically. Strong income, decent amount of tax revenue coming in, strong OFN, and he can't make civil rights or any domestic stuff really worse. And like there are varying degrees where he can make it better. So like you can't really go wrong with Bennett, I think. Like he's kind of boring. But like sometimes you just need a boring president. I'm just saying. So I'll go ahead and did I put him in A tier last time? I did. I did put him in A tier. I'm going to do that again. A tier for Bennett. A little boring, but you know what? He's fine. Potentially be wholesome. Nothing wrong with that. Since we're on the topic of wholesome, let's go in the inverse opposite direction. Lyndon Johnson. Possession of Jumbo himself. Or imagine how that kind of half military lines, half EU version of NATO, IRL, how tight would that should be? That would be pretty awesome. LBJ. A man who I'm kind of conflicted of as a president. Because in real life, he was this incredible domestic president with his policies, and also fucking abhorrent foreign policy-wise. At least with Vietnam. Not the best situation there. And I'm gonna stop myself before I go on a historical diatribe, because I've been reading a book that covers LBJ a little bit. Let's talk about TNO. Solid president. Really focuses on more poverty stuff. Can give some pretty substantial boost to civil rights, which is very nice. The problem with LBJ before is that I believe he was the first president to have programmed content, so he didn't really have the Senate mechanic, like the bill passing mechanic. So it was very kind of bare bones and kind of boring to play as LBJ. But I believe that's been amended now. Now he has an actual bill passing mechanic, and that's pretty fun. And there's a mechanic of trying to figure out how far you want to push with the Great Society, because if you keep pushing, the nationalists will gain more power and this and that, and you have to balance all that out and make sure not to neglect civil rights, or else stuff will go bad there. There's a balancing act there, but you can leave America as a more prosperous nation and a kinder nation than it was before. So I'll go ahead and give LBJ probably the same that I do before. You can't really go wrong with Jumbo. I'm thinking strong A, maybe a light S. I'll keep it an A right now. Can't go wrong with Jumbo. You really can't. His foreign policy strikes me as kind of like a little boring and, like, nothing really notable there. Like, he doesn't make the OFN weaker, but he doesn't really make it stronger either. But yeah. Some interesting stuff going on there. Next up, we have... Well, we only have one more option for 64. Bobby Kennedy. Good old Bobby. So if Nixon vetoes the Civil Rights Act, Jack gets shot, the NPP decides to draft Bobby Kennedy, and he just says, screw it, draft me. And he gets elected. And Bobby Kennedy, it kind of goes, like, he can be a very good president, but the mechanics behind him are kind of weird at times. And, like, I remember when I was first playing a Bobby Kennedy campaign behind the scenes, like, the mechanics are kind of weird in how they're explained. Now it's a bit more well addressed, and like there's a GUI, but I'm always going to hold a little bit of resentment for how he first explained it. You kind of have to balance how you're perceived by everyone as well as how liberal you are, because if you're too liberal and people don't like you, like the National Progressive Pact doesn't like you, there's a tick that can start going up, and if it reaches a certain point, there's an event that will pass where Bobby Kennedy and his vice president, William Guy, it used to be Hubert Humphrey, which made it even worse, but it's just William Guy, some guy from North Dakota now, well, governor from North Dakota, both get fucking shot and die. And that leads to Strom Thurmond becoming president, because he blackmails his way into becoming president pro tempore, and he blackmails the speaker into not becoming president. Magic the Gathering. I know what you meant there, but the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene got changed to Magic the Gathering is very funny. But yeah, the MPP exists. It would be fucking weird. So that's sort of like my reservations with putting him in S tier. Is that, well, if Bobby lives, things will be okay generally. That said, there are some potential ways where things can go too bad. He institutes COINTELPRO to investigate segregationists, and some of his... I think it was actually Bobby Kennedy who said the quote, if you stare into the, he who hunts monsters better wish he, be careful unless he becomes a monster, and if you look into the abyss may stare back. It's sort of that quandary where if you push too far... Like, you can get investigated for COINTELPRO, and you'll have your own Nixon Watergate moment. An actual Nixon Watergate moment. The Nixon Watergate moment, because they don't have that for the Nixon path anymore. And it will devastate your the trust in the White House. And you can also, depending on how you decide to approach foreign policy stuff, you can cause some strife trying to get that going. Oh, the Magic Gathering was intentional. That's fair. That was actually pretty funny. So, and the problem is, like, Bobby Kennedy, it can be so great. Like, food banks, arguably one of the strongest presidents on the civil rights thing, decent economic potential, and same foreign policy option as Wallace and I think the rest of the NPP candidates. So not bad at all, but it can also go very bad potentially. So I'll go ahead and put him A tier. Less potential down. The way I'll describe Bobby Kennedy: higher highs, but also potentially like lower lows for the U.S. Than LBJ. That's, I think, the best way to describe him. Speaking of the lowest lows, let's talk about the secret VP option. If Bobby Kennedy gets shot and murdered, William Guy gets shot and murdered, so it doesn't go to the vice president, it will end up falling to the president pro tempore, Strom fucking Thurmond. Strom Thurmond is Wallace, George Wallace, not Wallace Bennett. Is George Wallace with none of the really redeemable qualities. Because his whole tree is focused on civil rights, or as he'd probably describe them, civil wrongs. And basically packing the courts and making it so that the civil rights legislation is retracted. 1948 red moment. Is that 48 red? Are you thinking about Identity War? Is that... You might be thinking of Identity War. Not red. Not red. But yeah, like, the only potentially good side is that if you finish the segregation path, which I don't know why you would want to do that, other than, like, setting things up badly or, like, for, like, story reasons. You can do the foreign policy tree and get Hawaii back, but you can do that with any of the NPP presidents, so that's not a unique thing. So that doesn't really elevate things past the fact that it's the somehow more racist version of George Wallace. It was Identity War who had Thurmond as a candidate. God, I forgot about that. Yeah, I'm gonna put him in F tier. There's not much redeeming about him at all. In fact, like, only Hawaii. That's really about it. Now we'll go ahead and get to the 68 candidates. Who do I want to go at from here? I mean, they're almost all in order from their appearance, so I might as well go ahead. I'll start with the guy at the front. Barry Goldwater. For candidates, it's if you have an NPP candidate elected in 64, you have a choice between Philip Hart of the Democrats or Barry Goldwater of the Republicans. If you have an R or D elected, you have Margaret Chase Smith of the Nationalist part of the NPP or Michael Harrington for the center path. So I'll go ahead and look at, Goldwater is right there. So I'll go and do that. Interesting guy. Senator from Arizona. Really the guy, like, he kind of walked and then fell flat on his face in the 64 election so that Reagan could end up running and sweeping in 80 and 84. Goldwater is an interesting figure. Goldwater is the very definition of dweeb, the only president a group of middle schools could beat up and take his lunch money. Fair. Because if you're elected, you have the option to pass a Civil Rights Act or potentially revoke or remove the Civil Rights Act. So you have like a weird duality option, and if there's a Civil Rights Act, I believe that you might just be forced to remove it in a reaction tree, which is a little potentially awkward. He doesn't do anything to enforce segregation necessarily beyond that, but there's some weird questions there. But there's also the option of him passing a Civil Rights Act to begin with. So it's a little bit of a... It's a bit of a mixed bag there. And economically, you have two options, one of which is basically a Wallace Bennett light option. Wallace Bennett's economy light. Similar to Bennett's economy, or you can do Reaganomics, not Reaganomics. His economic minister, I think, is Don Regan, his name, and so it's basically Reaganomics. So, without getting into like the real life politics and implications of it, from what I remember, the Wallace option is it's a light version of Wallace's path, which is helping integrate the OFN economies better. So you can do some decent stuff there, or you can do Reaganomics, which I forget how exactly they model it, like in game, so I'm not going to comment too much there. because that might just get into like real life politics and your opinions on was Reaganomics good or bad. So I'll avoid that. You have some undeniably cool stuff as Barry Goldwater. With Barry Goldwater, you can pass some nice environmental protections, no matter what. Environmental regulations, that's pretty cool. In fact, in the RFK path, when you're negotiating to get the Civil Rights Act through, if you want, if you're trying to work and butter up things with the RDs, Goldwater's condition is to help protect the environment. That's pretty cool. I'm an environmental stand. I like the environment. What can I say? I'm biased there. So that's kind of cool. One thing that gets awkward, potentially, is that you can investigate unions and basically try to shut down, like, the AFL-CIO. And it's interesting. Politics aside, Goldwater's a dork, and I want to bully him regardless. All right, Gav. The union investigation thing can go in some particular ways, because you can try to forge evidence to try to get them shut down, but you will get discovered. And if you get discovered, it does not go very well, and you enable some more radical factions to have some power. Now, that'll lead in discussions like, well, there were some issues with union corruption at the time, mafia ties, whatever. So that'll get more into a debate of, like, your politics on things, I suppose. But if you can enable commies or fascists to take over, because you also have the option to investigate either fascists or commies. But if you can end up accidentally enabling one or the other, like I think if you shut down one and you get caught for busting unions, the other gets a lot of power, which is not good. I think that's how it works, at least. But Goldwater has some pretty cool moments. I think possibly one of my favorite little, like, sub-events is if Borman wants to have rapprochement with the West and, like, try to make things better with the U.S., all the U.S. presidents have the option to say if they want to or not, except for Goldwater, because Goldwater has an event, because Barry Goldwater was a Jewish guy. And with that event gets sent in, you don't get the typical option. You have an event where he ponders about how his, parents or grandparents, I forget exactly, left the U.S., left Europe for the U.S., and if they were still stuck there, he wouldn't be there. And, like, he just outright says, no, America does not negotiate with monsters. And that is unfathomably based. And if you do things ideally, like, I don't know about ideally, but you can come out as a pretty okay America with a Barry Goldwater, but you can also come out in a far worse situation than you started with. So, with that in mind, a very mixed bag. I think C tier is fair, all things considered. Imagine what a Yockey State of the Union address will be like. We'll get to that Yockey when we get to Yockey. Yeah. Yeah, I think C tier's fair for Barry Goldwater. Not the worst option you can have by any means. Definitely not the most potentially damaging. Are we about to get into that? We might just get into that right now. That brings us to Margaret Chase Smith, Senator from Maine, Republican in real life, NPPN in TNO. Her whole thing is trying to make the NPP a coherent party, or like a coherent coalition, I guess, at this point, because you have, like, ardent segregationists working together, like union bosses and progressives, and it's a weird combo. So you can choose to either align with one side or the other, or try to cut out a middle path, and it can potentially go pretty well, depending on how you want to look at it, or if you court, like, the states' right faction, it can get kind of ugly. One of the more uncomfortable possibilities for Chase Smith is if your whichever coalition partner ends up falling through, you have the option, and it's a very rough option, to align with the sovereigntists, Yockey's party. And if that happens, you kick off a chain of events where, well, Asian Americans start getting, like, beat up in the street and harassed, for one, which is not good. And Yockey will just end up committing an internal coup at the 72 caucus and make himself the candidate. And he'll be set up in a pretty good position to win, potentially. So the NPP is, Margaret Chase Smith is probably the easiest path for radicals to take control in the U.S. And I guess if you're cringe and you don't like democracy and freedom, that might be a selling point for you, but we don't approve of that in this stream, personally speaking. Unless I'm playing as role-playing, then that's kind of cool, but looking at things like a more objectively, not role-play way, not a good way, but Chase Smith is like the ultimate definition of a mixed bag. You could do some pretty cool stuff, or you could go down a horrible, horrible path. Kind of similar to Goldwater in that way. Plus, the foreign policy is it's the same NPP tree. Oh, that reminds me. Goldwater cannot get Hawaii back. I don't think he can, at least. He might have the option now, but from my recollection of his 68 candidates, used to not be able to do that. At least, like, the RDs. When Glenn got cut, there's a different option there. Maggie Glass, Nicaragua Smith. True. Like, foreign policy is like the same foreign policy path that I think most VMPB candidates get, which is not bad, by all means. It's in the standing of a civil war, it's pretty solid. Not civil, the Cold War in this timeline. It's not bad. But, yeah, it can go south so many ways as Margaret Chase Smith. So I'm going to put her in C for similar reasons as Goldwater. Just like further extremes on the good or the bad there. So I think it balances out to a C tier, personally speaking. Phil Hart's going to take a bit of some longer time to get into. So I'll just go ahead and get into Michael Harrington because I honestly don't have much to say about him. I might just be personally biased, but I think Michael Harrington is just kind of boring, I'll be honest. Like, I haven't played him, so I can't confirm for sure, but it just kind of seems like a more boring LBJ with not as much opposition that he probably should be getting. Like, his whole shtick is he, like, a activist who wants to turn America into a democratic socialist state. Sputter and C for coup, true. I mean, like, that's... Yeah, RFK with less charisma. I don't know. This is, like... It's just, like, it just strikes me as a boring path, I'll be honest. And, like... Again, like, he can do some cool stuff. Like, get potentially, like, some pretty good civil rights passed. But... Just, like, from everything I recall... Like, Harrington is just... You could do similar shit with him as you can, like, LBJ or RFK. Just kind of more boringly. Like, that's kind of the thing. He's just boring. That's the best way I can describe him, I'll be honest. And, like, I don't want to knock him too much, like, quality, like, but, like, the quality of the content doesn't not matter here. And just, like, from everything I've seen, like, he's the most boring option out of here. I've seen, like, some subreddit posts where they're working on, like, replacing him with, like, Hubert Humphrey, for example. And that seems cool. At least more interesting, potentially, than Michael Harrington. No disrespect to the guy in real life. Interesting guy. He literally inspired the Great Society by LBJ, which kind of goes to show, like, you could just get the shit with other candidates. The NPP foreign policy tree is solid. But, after a while, it's just like, if it's not complemented with much else, I don't know if I'm being entirely internally consistent with how I'm going to rank him. But I'm going to put him in B tier. B for boring. America won't be in a much worse off place. Like, you can have some foreign policy shut down, or like some of your policy shut down in the Supreme Court if you don't have it balanced in a certain way. But it's just like, whatever. Now we get to Philip Hart. Now, I was John Glenn's number one soldier. If 1,000 people were John Glenn fans, I was one of them. If there were 100, I was one of them. If there was only one, I was that man. I was that guy. If there were 0, I was dead. And I'll be honest, I was upset when I found out they were taking Glenn out for like some space content stuff. Because I did a full... I'm emotionally attached because I did a Glenn campaign. And that was some of the most fun I've had in Hearts of Iron 4 ever. Like, going to Mars was unfathomably based. You could get you like a 4-day work week, Social Security, ending lobbying. It was borderline like wish fulfillment, but it was fun, and you could go to space, and I fucking love space. And now the space content is being cut or turned into its own game or whatever the hell's going on there. I don't know. I was not happy when they cut John Glenn. And then I found out they're replacing him with what? Philip Hart? This dude with glasses? Who the hell is he? And I preempt this to say that Philip Hart's content appears to be maybe the best stuff in TNO ever. It's so fucking impeccably well written for once. And there's a lot of stuff like the GUIs and stuff like that. It is compelling. The writing is top notch. It honestly blows Glenn out of the water, I'll be honest. Because, Glenn was fun, but like the writing wasn't always the best. Like, I haven't played some of these, but I've read some of the events, and they got me I don't cry easily, and I didn't cry reading them, but I felt it in my core just seeing that. It was, incredible shit. Incredible shit. So let's talk about Hart. I think his whole shtick is what's called, I think it describes like small government liberalism. And so like helping like invest in like, like not having huge government oversight, but like helping the states do their own shit. I think that's roughly what it is. I might be misremembering. You can do stuff like urban renewal and working on making cities better. And if it doesn't work out with the Urban Renewal Initiative, I think it is, URI, if it doesn't work out, you'll kind of screw the cities, but you'll just have, people flee to the suburbs and this and that. So you just kind of get like America Now, which is not good necessarily, but also like it could potentially be worse. But you have the potential to make America, like American cities, tight-knit and well-off. You also have a bunch of infrastructure shit. And if there's like two things that I'm kind of not necessarily nerdy about, it's the environment and it's infrastructure. And you have a whole infrastructure or GUI where you can work on building highways and trains. Trains. In America. It is impeccable. Now, Philip Hart was broken as shit at release, but they've managed to fix most of the issues at this point. They patched it out. So he is very much playable. And on top of everything, like, it's some of the newer TNO content, and so it's more up to date with higher standards. So Phil Hart is, like, just like content and writing wise, the best to play right now because he's the most well fleshed out and all that. And like, his wars is not the best, is not good necessarily, but it's, from my understanding, it's not as bad as it could be. And you get hit in the fucking feels, my god. If I did not want to see Glenn go, but Phil Hart is a worthy successor if I have ever seen one. So right at the top, if only for the fact that he's the most fleshed out and well developed president. Bad sides, I mean, he has you can have Henry Kissinger become a Secretary of State after Harry Truman dies. That's a little awkward, but Kissinger can get you Hawaii for free, basically. So even that, like, balances out. He might be the only RD president in 68 who can get Hawaii back. And all you have to do is, like, negotiate with Japan a little bit. And he makes it explicit that he's doing this to mess with and destabilize Germany. All things considered, if there's a Henry Kissinger that I can get behind, which is a very tall order to ask, I can get behind the TNO Henry Kissinger. It's kind of hard. I'm a little torn. Henry Kissinger is not cool at all, but like, everything is good enough. I can overlook Henry Kissinger, which is a huge thing to say because it's fucking Henry Kissinger. I don't want to get too sidetracked. So, I mean, they needed something to make it a little less wholesome and kind of balance it out. So, like, whatever, that's fine. And remember, it's the Cold War. They need to balance it out with, like, not as wholesome or whatever. I don't know. Like, you set yourself up well for the Cold War there. So, yeah. S tier for Phil Hart. Now, Phil Hart will die into a second term. A spoiler alert. I probably should have preempted that by saying I'm going to talk about a lot of shit. Phil Hart dies, and that leaves he will either die or he will resign and then die after he resigns. And he'll have his VP take charge, this guy, Chet Morrison. And the Chet Morrison path is basically trying to save every little bit of progress that you have tried to set up with Hart. Because after Hart dies, you have some backlash. And this is kind of where potentially some of the downsides of the Hart presidency can come in. Because if you don't manage all that well before Phil goes, it will end up imploding on Morrison, and it's not very good potentially. And like, Morrison's like a colorful character. He's a Southern boy from the state of Louisiana. He's married to Zaza Gabor, who's like the celebrity gold digger. From my understanding, that's kind of how I just understand it. She married like 20 different people, married him, and then like divorcing him in real life. Or like she can like if you put her in charge to help the URI, she will fuck things up and have cabinet members quit. And that will just end to the URI being revoked and kind of undoing all the progress that can be done with Hart campaign. And I believe like one or two things are hard-coded to be revoked no matter what, but you also have the potential to rally people and end up saving the URI for the most part. So it all kind of depends on how you manage Hart before and how it goes and how you manage it after the resignation and stuff. So your mileage may vary. Well, that's a good way to put it. But it's an interesting turn of events. If it gets revoked, that's not fun. But it's just gonna end up being well, that's not good. But it'll make things worse. But I don't believe it'll potentially invigorate radicals. It'll just initiate mass apathy. And that's just America today, isn't it? So, not the best, but, I'm gonna put him in B tier. Probably above all these guys. I'm kind of roughly, no, I was kind of right before I set it up in C tier. It can be alright. What can I say? Nothing much more. Okay, so we're finally getting into the 6 potential candidates for 1972. So you have it from the 4 major parts of the factions before. The Republicans with George Romney, the Democrats with Gene Kirkpatrick, the Nationalists with Phyllis Schlafly, I think that's how you say that, and the Progressives with Scoop Johnson, Henry Jackson as Scoop. 72 is also when you can elect the more radical, the gamer presidents, if you will, of a sovereigntist with Yockey, and the communists with Hall. Where should we begin with all these guys? George Romney. We'll start with George Romney. Interesting guy. We only have so much to look into with all these guys. So I can only say so much about him. George Romney, moderate Republican, father of Mitt, can be elected. His whole thing is more, he's arguably comparable to Harrington, that he's sort of a boring president, but more, I guess it's more in a Wallace way, a Wallace Bennett way than it is a Harrington, where Harrington just ends up kind of being boring by default because there's nothing uniquely interesting about him. Well, Romney's more like the model manager type. He's not going to cut all the programs, but he wants to make them more efficient, and he'll work, get a halfway decent foreign policy, work valid. He's kind of like a mild-mannered, sort of a Rockefeller Republican. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I can potentially see him being an A tier. Once he actually gets full content. The thing that makes me a little reluctant to put him into the A tier is the fact that if you set it up so that Romney is the candidate for the RDs and Yockey, or maybe not Hall, but Yockey is a candidate, he will not show up to the debate, and that ends up boosting Yockey a little bit in the polls. So he can kind of indirectly boost the potential radical from going into office, but the thing that doesn't make me dock it too much is that if Yockey's already a candidate for the election, America's not in a good place already, is it? So it's hard to really blame that on old Romney. So George Romney, B tier, I guess. Yeah, I think that's fair. We'll talk about his counterpart in the RD coalition. Gene Kirkpatrick. She used to be the candidate for the Nationalists, neoconservative, very hawkish, basically like a Reagan-esque. It's unrelated, but Saudi Arabia just lifted its 72-year-long ban on alcohol, apparently. That's interesting, huh? I know where I was on this day. So Jean Kirkpatrick, she used to be the nationalist type and basically just like neoconservative Reagan shit. But they changed it around possibly to more reflect her old, like, original, like, early on beliefs. If you ever heard of, like, the Marxist to neoconservative pipeline, it's this concept that people, like, start off as Marxists, like these radical communists, and sort of like, I don't know if it's quite like a horseshoe theory type deal, but they just end up becoming, like, these neoconservative war hawks. And Jean Kirkpatrick is, like, the core embodiment of that. If there is at least one case that might prove, if not prove it, at least show that it's not out of nowhere, Jean Kirkpatrick, because she started off as a socialist, and by the end of her political life, she was working in the Reagan administration. Her path is interesting because she's very hawkish, but she also has a more liberal approach to economics and domestic stuff. So you can have some interesting contrasts going on there. I'll be honest, I don't know how different it really makes her from Scoop Jackson. I'll be completely honest. Because Scoop's whole shtick was like bombs and welfare. I guess the more interesting fact is that Scoop Jackson seemed to be actually dedicated to making unions strong, and it's not entirely clear with how the Kirkpatrick content is being shaped up, if that's just a political shtick for her to be able to just do war shit or not. It is hard to say. I don't know. There's not enough yet to really comment on content-wise. But I mean, it seems potentially interesting. We'll have to wait until, I'm going to say 2078, till we get the Kirkpatrick content fleshed out to play for ourselves. And, yeah, we'll wait and see then. But for now, I don't know. B tier? Like, there's not enough. Like, this is kind of the problem I kind of had with some of these other 72 candidates. Like, it's really fucking hard to say anything about them when you only have, like, a couple focuses and stuff. Because you don't know how it's fully going to develop. Scoop Jackson is kind of similar. I'll be honest, like, Jean Kirkpatrick and Scoop Jackson, they kind of just seem similar to me. Just that I can kind of tell that Scoop is more fully dedicated to everything. So Scoop Jackson, senator from Washington State. Not that there are senators from D.C., so I don't know if I need to make that distinction anyway. Yeah. I feel like I could probably copy and paste Kirkpatrick's segments and put it in. From my understanding, that there's a bit more of a dynamism potentially in his cabinet, because he puts like Frank Church as the Secretary of State, which for those of you who don't know, Frank Church is senator from Idaho, a Democrat in Idaho. Crazy thought nowadays, I know, but he was a guy who like basically like did all the investigations into like the FBI and corruption and stuff. Very more pacifistic guy. It's like there seems like there's going to be a potential conflict between like the more more dovish elements of the progressive pact and then the more hawkish elements of the progressive pact, which seems potentially interesting. And that kind of leads me like the same issue though. Like I don't know how it's going to develop. A stronger America is going to be nice. But I don't know. And I'll be honest, I can't tell the difference really between what Kirkpatrick is supposed to be versus what Scoop is going to be, except Scoop is the glass Tokyo guy and Kirkpatrick is the girl boss gal. So, I don't know. I mean, Kirkpatrick could be the first female president, so that would be kind of cool. So I'll put her a little higher, I guess, for that than Scoop, but you could change either of these up in any position, and I probably wouldn't argue with you there. Phyllis Schlafly, the Nationals. We'll save the gaming for last. This is sort of the exception to the I don't know enough about them from what I see to know what they're going to be like. We don't have much of a Schlafly path, but I can kind of already tell that it's potentially going to be horrific. Like, out of like all the Democratic options, like who don't want to overthrow democracy, it seems like Schlafly might be the worst option. The worst pick for America. If only from like the perspective of the Cold War. Because Schlafly seems to be a staunch isolationist. And when you're in a Cold War between a fascist imperial Japan and literal Nazi Germany, throwing your hands up and saying, yeah, never mind. We're not going to worry about any of that. Can I get a recap of Schlafly? I know she's loopy, but details I'm fuzzy on. She's from Missouri, same as Harrington. That's kind of their only similarities. In real life, she was a big activist. She's one of the main women who helped prevent the Equal Rights Amendment from being passed, because she went to all these states and said, like, well, we can't let women be equal because of da-da-da-da-da. And she has a very peculiar approach to policy. I remember her VP option is John Anderson, who like ran like the 1980s. It was like the middle guy between Reagan and Carter. Interesting guy. Like, he started off as more hawkish, but like events in real life moderate him out. And it looks like there's like a similar event, but it's when he becomes VP to Schlafly. No, that's a good way to put it. I think that's an okay way to put it, at least. I'm not fully sure. She basically, Anderson sees, like, how she has, like, these massive prayer circles and, like, starts talking crazy shit to decide policy. And this is just where I kind of realize, wait a minute. What the fuck did I sign up for? What am I doing here? Like, to hit home with foreign policy stuff, she makes Jerry Falwell the Secretary of State. Jerry Falwell, the massive preacher guy. And there's an event where he'll just go to an OFN meeting and just start rambling about how everyone needs to pitch in more and they're all godless and how the rapture is coming. I forget exactly. And everyone just looks at him like he's fucking insane. And he looks at all of them and saying like, oh, they were shocked by how good I am. Schlafly is a fucking disaster for the United States in the Cold War. In that sense, I'd almost say she's worse than like a Thurmond, because Thurmond will at least like he has a generic NPP foreign policy shit, and is little yeah, maybe. And so it's just like, from the perspective of the Cold War, that's not gonna go well at all. Like, I don't know if I prefer her over, like, I'm trying to think. I might somewhat prefer Hall over Schlafly, which is fucking rough for me to say, I realize. I mean, I think she's undeniably devoted to the democratic process. Not for everyone. Very anti-gay. Which, I mean, it's the 70s, so it's not the craziest thing there, but it's also, like, looking with our modern standards, it's not the best. And I'll be honest, I don't know where she stands on the civil rights issue. But I think there's an America that does not have a civil rights bill passed anyway. Fuck. I don't know if she'd pass a Civil Rights Act. I think I'm going to put her in F tier. I really am. Like, she only has, like, 10 fucking focuses. But, like, from, like, the foreign policy, geopolitical stuff, I don't trust it for a second. And, like, I'm just going on rough memory for what I remember the 72 trees to be like. So, if I'm wrong, go ahead and correct me. Because I might be wrong. I don't know. Governor's other stances, I can't imagine her stance on civil rights would be too poggers. I do not think so either. So, yeah. So that leads us to the funny people. Hall and Yockey. Let me talk about Hall. I'll talk about Gus Hall first. From Minnesota. Like our dearly beloved Imperial Drylander. Shout out Dry. If you're watching this, Dry, hi. How are ya? He's a literal communist. A literal communist. That's kind of... Hall can only be elected if the communists have so much power. And usually what that kind of means is that if America is that fucked enough to elect a open communist, America, the bastion of, like, in modern capitalism, if they elect a communist, things are fucked there already. Hall is very much a mixed bag. I believe they removed... Did they remove the homophobia stuff for Hall? What it used to be for Hall is that he basically used J. Edgar Hoover's alleged cross-dressing or something like that in the old content to get him impeached. And that kicks off a lavender scare where gay people get targeted all across the country. I don't believe that's in TNO nowadays anymore. I might have to go TV tropes. I will confer with the tropes real quick to check that, but that's undeniably not Pog. If they remove that, that might help things a little bit. I'll Control F, lavender. Yeah, I think the best way that I could explain Hall is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's how I describe his path. I don't think he has the, it doesn't look like he has the... Oh, I'll look up. Gays. I see nothing. Homo. Nothing. I think they removed... Wait. Yeah, I think they went ahead and they removed the lavender scare path, which is good, because that is not something that should be in... Well, that's not good. Yeah. One of his main things that sketches me out is that he still moves to gut the FBI and the CIA, which, to purge out, reactionary elements and set up like a socialist America. And, that's all well and good. In some sense, corruption, real life issues like imperialism, whatever. Like, that's all kind of understandable. But in the process of gutting all those institutions, you're making America susceptible to interference from foreign powers. And remember, This is a Cold War against the Nazi Germans or the Japanese and the Imperial Japanese. So if you're dealing with that, it's not good. I think what he does now is that he releases a bunch of letters revealing that the FBI might have killed, killed Fred Hampton and possibly Malcolm X, maybe MLK. I forget if they include that possibility in there. And like it's sort of thing like most things probably happen in real life. I don't know about MLK, but Fred Hampton definitely seemed to be killed by the FBI. And like, are there some issues that probably should be tackled there? Maybe. But if you're weakening America in the Cold War, I don't know if that's a worthwhile benefit. And it's hard to tell if like all of those are fully like true there. And then it's like he can do a potentially good foreign civil rights thing, which that's one of the things that can redeem him. He can have a pretty strong, some might argue it's a little bit too strong, mandating like state intervention, all that. So like Hall is complicated. Like the road hell is good, paved with good intentions. He might fucking destroy American democracy and potentially make America stronger for the American enemies stronger in this Cold War, which is not something that should happen in this Cold War. Like, I just want to clarify. There's a lot of debates about America's roles in imperialist, potentially imperialist power. And like, there's like commentary that you could talk about real life shit. And I'm not going to weigh into that. But I am going to say, in the TNO world, when your options are a liberal democracy, which has some problems, or two fascist powers that are potentially openly genocidal, if you're weakening the one liberal democracy, I don't care what you are. If you're like, as long as you're like, if you're to the left of Albert Speer, any of that should horrify you. I'll put it like that. So I'm kind of looking at it from like that way when I'm talking about imperialism. I'm actually torn between D and F tier. The main reason I'm torn on D tier is like I only have Wallace in D tier right now. The undemocratic stuff is not good at all. Like, Thurmond, at least, I know, believes in democracy. Schlafly might, too. But who knows what happened. Hall is willing to potentially break democracy to help people out. So, and like, he's also cool with political. I was considering putting him in D tier, but I don't think I can fully justify doing that. Just like, if you're enabling political violence and you're making America weaker in the Cold War when you have Japan and Germany breathing down your necks, it's not good. There are probably better ways to approach that than that. So yeah, probably say he's better than Thurmond, actually. Because Thurmond is just, like, generic racist man with no redeemable qualities. But, like, his foreign policy won't weaken at everything. And then Hall, I believe, at least, will stand up to imperialism to some degree. I don't know entirely, though. I might be talking out my rear there. And that brings us to Yockey. The open German simp, Mr. Imperium himself. He's a National Socialist. He's a fascist. I don't even know if I need to say anything more to justify that. He is the worst case scenario. No question, no doubt about it. He openly, in his opening things, immediately attacks American democracy, initiates voter suppression, makes things worse for minorities, black people and Asian people, and all that. It's not good. He's openly, I think he's somewhat okay with Germany. I forget exactly. Which is not good. And he's openly okay with antagonizing Japan and potentially starting a nuclear war with them, which is going to wreck the whole world. So if things get horrible for Asian Americans, not good for black Americans, because if the Klan starts openly rolling around, it's not good by any measurable way. Like, apart from, like, memes. You know, funny, gamer memes. Like, like, and I'll make those jokes too, but looking at things, like, objectively, there's no other place he can be. No other place. He's bad for democracy. He's bad for the economy. He's bad for civil rights. He's bad for fucking all of them. Get the fuck out of here. No. F tier. The absolute worst. Anyway, that's my little diatribe for the day. And that's my tier list. If you have any disagreements or any, like, qualifications or, like, things you think I didn't bring up that you want to bring up, go ahead and tell me. And I might go ahead and redo this potentially when I do, if I get some more substantial feedback. I'm willing to hear it. Keep it respectful. Or at least not blatantly, horribly disrespectful. That's all I ask. At the end of the day, this is not that serious. And I'm trying to, like, keep outside politics out of this, although I don't know how well a job I did that there. But, yeah. This is my tier list. And remember, Afterpay Respect is not a denigration on Jack Kennedy. May he rest in peace. It is just, yeah. I explained that. If you don't remember, or if you didn't see that, then that's just what I mean. It's like, oh, well. But yeah, this is my tier list. Looking at it, I mostly stand by it. Like, I might move a few around a little bit, potentially. Like, I could see, like, maybe him going up to S, or LBJ going up to S is maybe my only, like, possible qualification. Like, I might change that. But, like, generally speaking, I look at this and I stand by it pretty well. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. But go and tell me what you'd rank all these people. And I'm also bit of a shameless promo, but I'm planning on doing another USA Let's Play in the future, and I'm probably gonna be playing Philip Hart and giving that a full playthrough. And if you don't know how to do my TNO Let's Plays, I like to read all the events. I like to dive into all the lore and all the events. I'll read, like, the little advisor blurbs and all that stuff. So if that interests you, taking a deep dive into Philip Hart's tree, potentially. I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that because I'm working and I got schools starting back up. But if you're interested in any of that, go ahead and hit the sub button. Hit the notification bell even. If you want to see anything more in the future, either more TNO tier lists or my Hearts of Iron 4 content, or, like, the little stuff I do occasionally, like test drives, or, like, where I play other games, or New Campaign Trail, I play that a fair bit. Other Paradox games I want to get back into, or other strategy games in general. Go ahead and check that all out. Check out my various links, including the Twitch, which this was filmed on live. You can check that out. Send a subscription or a Twitch Prime if you're feeling generous or you want to support me. Also have a Patreon if you want to check that out. I have a Discord if you want to join, be notified when I go live, chat with the community, all that fun stuff. And I have a second YouTube channel. I honestly don't do as much on it as I should, but if you just want to check that out, I'll do like flag content occasionally or US state stuff, like general geography stuff. So if you're interested in that, go and check that out. But this is my tier list. I stand by it pretty well. And, yeah, that's it for now, my friends. My name has been Mr. Dogboat333. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for joining me, and